This week, Lesley Carhart joins us to discuss all things ICS security related. Then in the security news, heat waves and outages, GPS trackers are vulnerable, cracks in the Linux firewall, bad password crackers, microcode decryptors, SATA antennas, Okta vulnerabilities, not vulnerabilities, updates on former CIA agent and Vault 7 leaks, Decompiler Explorer, and Tuxedo brings us perhaps the coolest laptop ever. All that and more on this episode of Ball Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
If your websites conduct transactions or collect sensitive data, you have a material risk on your hands that could cost millions. The client-side security gap is being exploited daily with attacks like digital skimming, credential harvesting, and form jacking. 98% of sites use first and third-party JavaScript to power and enhance the user experience, opening up the client side to the adversary. Unlike most things in security, there is an easy fix. Start by understanding your risk. Let Source Defense give you a site-wide risk report this week. Visit securityweekly.com/source defense. Every hack follows the same pattern. First, hackers exploit a human error, like a leaked key or a secret left in code. They gain a foothold and then pivot, moving from one compromised system to the next. Teleport breaks this cycle. Open source Teleport gives every engineer, every piece of hardware, every application an identity, replacing secrets like passwords and keys with auto-expiring identity-based certificates. Learn why most visionary businesses in the world choose Teleport at securityweekly.com/teleport.
Well, my time was a simpler time. A long summer afternoon, waiting for a text file to download on a dial-up modem, a few lines of Fortran code to keep you warm at night, and little kids looked up at the stars and dreamed about being AS400 operators instead of TikTok stars. It was a simpler time. Our porn was ASCII too. And that's why I want to send Paul Asadorian to Washington, because he'll bring back those simpler times when COBOL ruled and everything was simple.
Welcome everyone to Ball Security Weekly. It's episode number 747 or 8?
8.
It's 8. 8. And it is July 20th, 2022, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. To my left, Dr. Doug White is in the house. Hello. What's up, man?
I have returned from the great beyond in Switzerland and COVID and all those other fun things.
That's good. It's good to have you back here in studio. And
I know.
I love the stories you put in for this week.
Yeah, there were some good ones this
I got
week.
to make the coolest laptop
You
joke.
did. That joke
I was giggling a lot about that.
It's going to epic.
Can't wait to talk about it. I don't think that has anything to do with security, but I can't wait.
It has nothing to do with security, but it was just something I saw.
We will talk about microcode updates, though. That does relate to security.
Yeah, that is security.
Mr. Josh Morpet is with us remotely. Josh, welcome.
Thank you. And I've got to give credit to Doug for actually doing a full Lake Wobegon introduction for you. That was awesome.
Well, thank you.
I'm
glad somebody got that.
What is he talking about?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, he's doing Lake Wobegon.
Yeah.
That was freaking awesome, man. Well done.
Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
I feel like some of Doug's intros are just underappreciated. Like the amount of cognitive thought that goes into that stream of above beyondness that he obtained in Switzerland is pretty impressive.
It couldn't possibly be because I was drunk. Yeah.
You can't possibly be drunk yet. If you're already drunk, it's going to be a long show.
He's a child of the 70s and 80s, so there's other ways.
A quick announcement: if you've got a specific guest or topic you'd like us to cover in one of the upcoming shows, you can visit securityweekly.com/guest, complete that form, and we will review those on a regular basis. Joining us today, Lesley Carhart, the Director of Incident Response at Dragos, is here to dive into ICS security topics, including some recent threat monitoring, ICS networks for security, incident response for ICS, and more. Lesley, welcome back to the show.
You got my vote, definitely. No problem. Thanks for having me.
It's nice to have you back here on Security Weekly, Lesley. What have you been up to lately? I know you've got like a lot of really cool hobbies, and of course you got career as well. But what's been going on with
My
Lesley?
God, yeah. I'm always busy. People ask me what I'm doing, and I try to explain, and they're like, "Wait, you just named 8 different things. Which one is your job?" But yeah, I'm still working at Dragos doing industrial cybersecurity. But tangentially, I'm involved in a lot of volunteer work in the community, especially career pipeline focused for cybersecurity. And then I have my alternate life where I am studying to be a martial arts master. So it's a lot of stuff going on at once, but and that's not even including various boards and activist groups and things like that. So it's been fun though. I keep myself busy.
That's good. Doing constructive things, which is important.
I try.
What martial arts do you study, Lesley?
Oh yeah, I teach Taekwondo and Tang Sudo and study those as well, and I also study Eskrima and Northern style Shaolin Kung Fu.
Nice. It's run quite the gamut of the different martial arts.
Okay, so I'm thinking Security Weekly cage match or something. I'll be the MC.
Seems to be a really common hobby in cybersecurity. A lot of martial artists out there. So
absolutely.
I don't know what that says about us. Does that mean we have like some anger issues, or we have some pent up frustration? Like, what does that say?
Lots of punching and breaking.
I actually did a survey on that a long time ago, and it turns out that, and this is very unofficial, informal, didn't go through a check with any of the boards at colleges and things like that, but it turns out that most of the people in InfoSec and even IT either want to blacksmith, woodwork, leatherwork, martial arts, or shoot. And it seems to be that the common denominator is they want to do something with their hands that has closure. They finish a move. They finish a birdhouse.
But also those don't involve sitting either.
Good point.
There's a level of destruction.
Yeah.
keeps your brain
Building
occupied too. I always liked in Sherlock Holmes, they talked about Sherlock Holmes being so smart, and I'm not nowhere near that smart, but being so smart that he needed to get into a fight to calm his brain down and not have to think about 1,000 things at once. So maybe we can all learn something from that.
Right.
The Zen moment. Yeah, I go shooting, and the paper target, when I can exist between myself and the paper target, I don't exist anymore. It's a Zen moment where I don't have to think about anything else. So I kind of agree.
No, it's well said, Josh.
When I go shooting, it's just like,
You're doing it wrong.
It's the opposite of Zen. It's like Nez.
Oh. So, Lesley, what kind of things have you been seeing in the ICS security or insecurity kind of trends?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, so doing incident response, you see a little bit of everything, but kind of divide up the cases we've been seeing to 3 categories. So there's ever increasing crimeware, commodity malware that's starting to really impact industrial spaces too. So of course, ransomware is out there, extortion, things like that. And then that's getting more targeted, and people are starting to think about industrial resources as a target for that because they've seen it work. And then there's, of course, the insiders. So whether that's purposeful or not, sometimes people are just shadow IT and they break things, they mess things up, make things insecure, or they do things purposely because they're mad. For various reasons, they're getting laid off. They didn't get a promotion, things like that. It happens everywhere, but industrial too. And then finally, there's the more advanced groups, like state-sponsored type groups that are really building footholds to be able to do something in the future. And that's only been increasing. So there's always crazy, wild incidents of all those different types going on in that space, because you're not dealing with just numbers on a spreadsheet there. You're dealing with life and safety and systems that can physically break and cause environmental damage, things like that. So very, very different space to work in terms of incident response. And also we have the dual challenge of, we talk about IT-OT convergence a lot in industrial, and I think I'm seeing something that I would term IT-OT divergence in a lot of cybersecurity skills. So that's a challenge we're facing too. There's a lot going on right now.
I want to go back to the first part of that, Lesley, because I think many of us, sometimes myself included, I'm like, well, if it's an incident that involves industrial control systems, it must be a nation-state attacker, and or maybe both, or someone that wants to disrupt the power grid or some kind of utility. it can never be an insider that made a mistake, or a cyber criminal group that's like, oh, we're just gonna like ransomware you or whatever, or mine crypto.
You forgot squirrels.
Yeah, or squirrels. Like, it's only nation state attack. I think in a lot of people's minds. So I think that in of itself was eye opening.
Yeah, no, I mean, you got to understand that, again, that back to that IT-OT convergence thing, talking about operational technology there. It was well over a decade ago that they really started putting more IT-focused technologies into industrial networks in a regular basis. So Windows, Cisco, Juniper, things like that are very common instead of rolling their own in terms of industrial vendors. So more and more of that common technology between IT and OT popping up, which means that when you're talking about something like ransomware, those common systems that are targets of ransomware on the enterprise side, they can get ransomed too. And what does that mean for an industrial environment? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have an immediate direct impact on the low-level systems that make the process go, but it can definitely impact things like the workstations, the embedded workstations or PCs that the people who operate the process use to see what's going on. So suddenly you can't see what your process is doing and if it's working safely. And then you get into these conditions where they're like, well, it's going to cost us X million dollars to shut down a day or an hour even, but we can't see if the system's operating safely. So this ransomware has caused us to shut down the process ourselves. The adversary never had to go in there and learn how to interact with a PLC and shut that down and do nation state foo, but they successfully shut down the facility because they caused a situation where the operators can't see if something's on fire anymore, potentially. So yeah, it can be impactful, even if it doesn't necessarily impact the low-level PLCs, RTUs, things like that.
Are we starting to see some of the newer innovations kind of around where we started to see things like EDR or XDR or some of the advancements in SIM and AI and behavioral pieces? Are we starting to see some of that innovation start to make the shift over into OT? And what are some of the companies that are doing that? Obviously outside of Dragos, because you guys are doing some cool shit. So there's that. But other than that, do we see that innovation happening in the industry itself?
Frankly, no. There's a lot of passive technology development in OT. And what we do at Dragos is we develop primarily passive monitoring products that can operate off a span port or a tap, et cetera. And they're not very interactive with the industrial network for a good reason. A lot of lower level devices are still sensitive to things like scanning. Networks can be lower bandwidth. We're talking about legacy systems. There's still Windows NT out there running things. So in talking about doing like wide scale, like XDR or EDR deployments in these environments is still kind of in the future, science fiction stuff. And that's why I talk about like that concept of divergence between IT and OT cybersecurity skills, because if you see people going to school now to study things like incident response or penetration testing or security ops, they're really being taught to be heavily reliant on those modern, awesome tools that we love. And in the spaces that I work in, they often can't be present at all. So that's a diverging set of skills there. We're talking about doing legacy stuff because really there isn't a lot of that modern tooling popping up in industrial for good reason. Because it can cause a disruption. It can cause overhead in the industrial networks. It can also cause conflicts with the vendors, with what they authorize to be installed and then agree to warranty the system for. So you can cause conflicts in your service agreements with the vendor by installing extra stuff. So
do you see the vendors making any advancements?
Yeah.
I was going to say, do you see any of the vendors starting to make those advancements? So, we've had DMP3, we've had Modbus, we had Profinet for decades. Like, are we starting to see some innovation around the vendors starting to integrate additional stacks on top of the protocols where we can start to leverage some of those things out in the field bus, or actually getting a handle on their Purdue levels and how these integrators are setting them up so we don't have so many issues? Like, where is the security piece of this starting to mature to?
Yeah, so vendors are doing a lot of new security things in their newer systems. So let's start out with that. They definitely are thinking about security more. The first thing to note about that, though, is that these systems have super long life cycles. So I'm just starting to see Windows 10 pop up places. Systems are replaced maybe every decade. It takes a long time for what's happening today in the development workshops of industrial vendors to show up in wide deployments across the landscape, especially in various verticals. But the second question, the second thing you brought up was like, can we start putting overhead on protocols to make them more secure? And that's a lot harder. When you hit the big red button on the wall of your industrial facility to stop things from working, it really needs to shut things off right away. Whether that's a virtual red button on your HMI or one that's physically on the wall, things need to shut down. When you make an adjustment to a temperature, it needs to happen promptly, et cetera, pressure, whatever. If you start adding overhead to some of these simple industrial lower level protocols, that's more potential points of failure, especially if you're talking about encryption, things like that. There's more things that can go wrong. There's more potential delays, and that all potentially impacts the industrial process. So there's things we can do, and there's things that are harder to do logistically in general. So definitely a challenge that the vendors are tackling, but it's a hard challenge.
I mean, what you're saying is, I apologize, bear with me 1 second.
No,
and I love what you're saying, and it makes total sense. But effectively what you're saying is that they have decided to handicap themselves, the vendors this is, in terms of adding security to the systems, to the protocols, to the big red button or the speed control or the pressure control or the valve or whatever, in favor of it has to work. But they've taken the security usability graph and gone all the way to usability and all the way down on security, and then connected it all to the internet and said, we're cool. And I know you're not saying that, please forgive me. I'm not saying you're advocating for that, but it doesn't seem like that's a wise choice.
In the CIA triad, we normally talk about a balance in our IT and enterprise networks, but it's all about availability and integrity of the data. That, when you hit the red button, it's got to do promptly what it's supposed to do in industrial. That's something that's a life and safety issue well beyond cybersecurity. What that means is, that the integrity of the data from a security perspective is also important. That means we need to find other solutions to create that security. So that's an interesting challenge in industrial cybersecurity for us who do it commercially, for the government, and also for the vendors who produce the technologies. We've got to be creative and think of other solutions. We can't just tack things onto the protocols that are going to cause overhead. We can't just encrypt things that could potentially have issues being decrypted when it's life and death communications. So you've got to change your thinking a little bit. You've got to twist the CIA triad on its side there, and really think about it's no longer an equilateral triangle in ICS.
Yeah.
On top of having to integrate with legacy or the real-time operating systems and the devices that are available to conduct the process inside the network. And not even just that, but you also have things like your DCS services and Historium, where you have to have real live data for bidding for something like power. All of those things are things that you typically don't have to look at and think about in an IT space, and have to have that real-time availability for live things that can cause safety issues. So there's a lot of different challenges in OT, I think.
Not to mention like the home rolled systems that have been built that are just like very unique, and as well as regulatory bodies like where I worked with, a lot of this was regulated very heavily by the government. They couldn't change something. I mean, you couldn't just change a protocol or install something that could affect the signal that came from that, like you said, we had a big red button, and if somebody hit the big red button, there was a response time that had to be documented by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that said this will happen within so many, I don't remember what the rate was, but it had to happen very, very quickly, and it had to happen, or it's going to be really bad.
Is that when you had to leave the bathroom? Is that what the button was for?
Yeah, something like that. But I mean, I think all those things create a very difficult environment for security professionals, because when you go to them, they use all those things to push back, and they're pushing back with things that are pseudo valid. I mean, they're not completely spurious claims that they just can't do this, but then they also use that to just circle round and round. I mean, I've just seen that over and over again. It's like, well, yeah, we can't change it, and because we can't change it, it's isolated, but it's not isolated. Oh, well, it is isolated. No, it's not. And we just go round and round.
That's why this is such an important space for people to get into and learn more about, because again, I don't want to be Debbie Downer here. There's a lot that can be done. There is a lot that can be done here. Like I mentioned, like passive monitoring, there's a ton to be done there. There's also different ways to segment systems, isolate systems. There's authentication that can be improved in these networks. So things like remote access authentication, multi-factor, things that allow access into the actual industrial networks can be secured a great deal better. So there are tactics. Even vulnerability management is a huge one. So there are tactics for improving security in these networks, but we have to think outside the box. We have to think back to fundamentals that we might have thought about 20 years ago, and then, shape them for modern threats that these industrial networks face. So it's pretty exciting. It's pretty interesting. And there are things we can do. We just can't walk in with this IT mindset of, I'll just like upgrade Windows, because that's just not available.
Lesley, when you were talking about legacy networks, I want to drill in on that a little bit. What do you mean? Are we talking like thicknet, serial cables? Like, what are some of the more common things that you would kind of deem legacy? Not like giving too much away, right? I don't want you to talk about your customers or clients,
no.
but like what is most common that like give people some insight into what legacy means in ICS?
It really varies by vertical. Some verticals, industrial verticals out there, are way more mature than others.
Right.
And they have much higher security budgets. They do refreshes more often. They have more security personnel, and it shows. They're just better resourced.
Is that largely power? The power industry? Would classify
oil and gas is one that is pretty well resourced. Power varies in the United States because power organizations are so varied in our country. We don't have like a common national power provider like other countries might. So it can be kind of all over the place, but they tend to be a little bit better. And then you get to like municipal utilities, and some of them they're running on a shoestring, next to no personnel. Same with manufacturing. There's like no margins there to purchase cybersecurity stuff in some manufacturing industries. So it really varies. But in terms, it's all over the place. You get to see a little bit of everything. In those more mature verticals, you're starting to see a lot more Windows 10 now, but there's still a lot of Windows 7 out there. In terms of embedded systems, you still see XP all over the place, XP embedded. A lot of those embedded systems just have really long shelf lives. And then you will run into the occasional NT box or Windows 2000 box that is running something critical still. And for one reason or another hasn't been pulled out of production. So, and then that's just the Windows ecosystem. You see similar things in like the Linux ecosystem in terms of age of systems. So there's stuff back to the 90s running critical stuff. Absolutely. Sometimes even older. But a lot of early 2000s, mid 2000s stuff is out there at a lot of sites across all verticals right now.
Sure. Hold on. Speaking of older, Mr. Adrian Sanabria has joined us. I was thinking about some way to bring you in, Adrian.
Wow.
Man,
that was my segue.
Just comes out swinging.
What's up, man? It's good to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was just sharing in the Discord that there was a local radio station that I was helping out that had these proprietary PCI cards, and I think something like 6 months, before the latest Windows was end of support, they finally got that version of Windows finally got certified for these cards. That they were beholden to their third party, to their hardware provider, and what version of Windows they could run.
Yep. And when that happens, you got to think of other tactics. I mean, that's the adventure of being in cybersecurity in this space, is you can't just throw up your hands and be like, I guess I can't do security. You've got to think of other ways to do it. You've got to think of other tactics, architectural tactics, passive tactics, things like that to try to mitigate threats.
That's the fun part.
It is the
That's
fun
when
part.
you get to get creative.
Right.
Yeah.
There's at least one silver mine that still runs a fax. and they have no plan of moving off. And they have one person whose entire job is just buying parts on eBay.
Yeah, well, some of my solutions in these instances, like we have this HDMI matrix. It's more like a router. So you get 8 inputs, 8 outputs, and you can program which input maps to which output, which is kind of neat. And it came with a network port. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then I plugged it in, and I'll make a long story short. Like, it had Telnet on it. I was like, oh, well, can I disable that? No, okay. I'm like, but it doesn't ask me for any credentials when I Telnet to it. It just drops me in a menu, and I can program whatever, output I want to map to which input. And I'm like, how would it? And so to your point, Lesley, like thinking creatively, and this is by no means like the most creative solution ever, but I'm like, what if I actually wanted to use the network services? I could never put this on a production network. I'm like, well, just get a Raspberry Pi with a couple of Ethernet interfaces. I'm like, plug one into the back of the HDMI router and the other onto the network, and now we can SSH it, we can update it, and it's great. And I'm assuming you have probably a lot of stories similar to that, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got to have a lot of collaboration going between the site operators and engineers and their enterprise security and IT teams, and then yourself to make solutions that work. Usually there's not a great relationship between those organizations. Those have been damaged deeply over time because of misconceptions and miscommunications. So yeah, now it's a lot of collaborating, mending walls, mending bridges, and trying to come up with these really creative solutions to get people to meet people halfway, instead of just trying to throw IT cybersecurity at these problems. It doesn't work. And it's really important to build better security in these environments. That's why my colleagues and I just work in this space. It's because we care. It's because we know that there's security issues in the industrial space, and they've been mishandled for a really long time. And there are things that we can do, but we're going to have to shift our thinking and be willing to cooperate and be humble, things like that.
I think it's also important to get the people that are converging into this field, or maybe they are in this field, really to understand the business as well, because that is one of the reasons that those relationships have been tainted over the years, is not really understanding the business model and how these are fundamentally different from other technologies or startups that people have worked at. There are very specific business needs, and the business needs typically in these ICS after safety is the first priority. And so you really do have to understand the business and how the business makes money and fundamental aspects that are required for the business to continue operating outside of even regulatory.
And you should know that in IT too, but we're pretty bad at it. Thinking through that infrastructure of how things work, what we care about, what consequences we care about, things like that. Industrial people are really good at thinking about that, because things have always gone wrong, maintenance issues, human issues, things like that, and they're trying to manage risk. So they're really good at thinking about what could go wrong and how should we respond to that, at what severity, and what is our overall goal as an organization? What are we trying to do, and what are we trying to prevent? They're really good at that. We should do better at that across cybersecurity. It's really important.
They really embrace, at least maybe it was my experience, and maybe you can verify, they really embrace like Paul's idea of cobbling things together, because a lot of the people in that space that I worked with were very old-time engineering type people, and they didn't like when the IT people came in and said, put a Cisco ASA here, all your problems will be solved. They like better solutions, like I'm going to build this thing in this box out of coffee cans, we're going to run some wires in it, and it works. And they were really helpful with that stuff. They weren't as helpful when you came in with these sort of overarching, just segment your network kind of ideas.
Yeah, you can't play with that. Those people, they know more about their process and process engineering than you're, as a cybersecurity person, going to know in your whole life. So you've got to work with them.
Yeah.
You've got to be willing to listen to their problems and their concerns too. And then some of them are very interested in cybersecurity. So they will be interested in helping you if you approach it diplomatically and you talk about what you know and what you don't know and what you're trying to accomplish. So there's a lot of relationship mending that can happen there.
Yeah, I think when we gave them security concepts, because and this was a while ago with the power gen stuff, but when we gave them security concepts, they actually kind of embraced it. but it was because we were giving it to them from the perspective of how would you solve this problem, and they were like, oh, cool. And then you got old engineers dragging out slide rules and figuring out solutions that were completely different. And it's very interesting because it's almost, I called it Australia because it was like a separate genome. It was completely isolated from the rest of the world for so long that it just went off in its own direction. And I thought it was very interesting to talk to those guys because they had completely different perspectives on all this stuff than the regular IT security hacking community had at that time.
Lesley, there was
interesting.
An incident in Texas. And when I was reading articles about it, and I don't want you to comment on this particular case, right? I'm just using it as an example. I was reading the commentary and the articles about it, and there was like some debate where like there was an outage, I believe in a power plant, right, in Texas, and they were like, is it hackers or is it not hackers? And I'm like, how do you know? Like, if you come out and say it wasn't hackers, how deep did you dig down the rabbit hole to be able to like come out and say it wasn't hackers?
If the evil bit wasn't said, it's obviously not hackers.
Right.
No.
So I guess in your role, like how do you know? And like how far down the rabbit hole do you go? And then the follow-on question to that is, how do we find the right skills to be able to do that?
Wow. Okay. So you're going to have to remind me of that second question after I give you the long-winded answer.
I will. I promise. I promise.
But yeah, it's tough because in the end, and of course I'm a service provider, but as any incident response person serving an industrial environment, whether that's internally or externally, you really have to do what the organization needs because again, there's those health and safety concerns. If the plant tells you, hey, and plant leadership tells you, we need to get services safely up and running tomorrow, that's our highest priority. That's very different from them saying, hey, we need a root cause analysis to understand exactly what happened before we bring services back up. Now, you can advise about that, but it's very different situations.
And go ahead. I'm sorry. Did you have more there? The follow-on question was, how do we get the right skills to do that? Let's say they did say, hey, we really want to, and I understand the struggle, right? Like, you only have so many PLCs, let's say, attached. Like, oh, can I just go pull one of those and then attach this hardware thingy to it, and I'm using technical terms, and pull the firmware off so I can do a full level analysis and like then maybe go put it back. But there's a chance I could break the device in the process. There's a whole lot of issues with that. But how do you get people to develop the right skills to have to manually go do some of these investigations? Because oftentimes, if it's legacy gear and other circumstances, you may not be able to use modern tooling.
Yeah, so there is a lot of legacy forensics involved, and it makes it hard for me to hire people for sure. Because a lot of people today in all their curriculum, all their training, certifications, they're learning how to use modern things like EDR instead. People who have spent a couple years doing IR sometimes have only touched XDR, EDR, something like that. So that's entirely possible, and it's deeply problematic. It means we have to train people from the ground up in forensics, even for senior positions sometimes.
But I want to stop you there. It's a great point that how handicapped you are because EDR implies that you've got an endpoint agent and you've got logs. You probably have neither of those in most circumstances in ICS.
You can do a lot with traditional forensics. Memory forensics is, pure memory forensics is a powerful tool, as well as partial or full hard drive forensics and network forensics. Now, the more logging that exists in an environment, the better shape you are during incident response. And that's something we work very, very hard with our customers and our partners and our peers and our community to get through to people is try to get that logging out there, try to keep some evidence in case something happens. It's not just for detection. Detection is super important, but also in case there is, God forbid, an incident in your environment, that's going to be really crucial. We can do a lot with traditional forensics, pulling images of things, pulling traditional images of memory disk or setting up after the fact packet capture, especially in terms of things that involve malware. But it does make our job harder. Sometimes we can, it's like any incident response where there's next to no evidence or evidence has been destroyed. Sometimes you get a partial picture of what's going on to a certain level of confidence. It's challenging. It's certainly challenging. This is not for the weak of heart. This is not an industry or a space to be in for the weak of heart. You will have to make hard calls. Sometimes you won't get all the answers. And a lot of what you do is get things up and running as safely as you can and try to prepare better for the future, to secure things better in the future. So it's very challenging, sometimes not just technically, but emotionally for the incident responders, because everybody wants to catch the bad guy and know exactly what happened. And when there's no logging and the evidence has been destroyed over time, or people rebooted the machine and the memory's gone, you might not get that beautiful wrapped up with a bow case out of your CSI episode. So
that's a really great point, and I want to almost harp on the emotional part of that, right? Like, we talk about the balance between security and convenience, but in incident response, there's a balance between recovery and forensics and knowing exactly what happened, and they're in direct conflict with each other in both those instances. What you're saying is, you walk into a site and you're like, I gotta restore power because it's winter and people are gonna have a bad time, or it could be life or death, and I've got to recover, versus actually figuring out what happened. And that's a hard thing to deal with.
It's a hard decision in IT, and it's super hard in OT. You know, that decision, if you're using pcurl to move from containment to eradication, or identification to containment, those are always hard decisions to make, and somebody has to make them definitively based on risk and what you know. But yeah, I mean, if it's a power plant and it needs to be on because it's the dead of winter, I mean, you're going to do incident response differently. You're going to treat those stages differently. I've had organizations have to rebuild an entirely new network in parallel, so that they could swap over, because we knew enough to say that they were really, really, really owned. And there wasn't going to be an easy way to clean things up, and they could not be down because they were doing critical things. So there's been multiple occasions where I've had to recommend, you're going to have to build a new domain in an entirely isolated segment, and you're going to have to swap everything over with new credentials, and swap your operations over.
And those are harder decisions to make than someone asked me, I think my phone got hacked with this thing called Pegasus. They're like, what is that? And what do I do? I'm like, take your phone and run it through a shredder like 5 times and then go buy a new phone. And change your number while you're at it.
Yeah.
And that's really the only way. And that's easy for me to say. I mean, from a consumer perspective, that's an inconvenience, but it's a mild, nowadays with phones, right? It's a mild inconvenience. You can't walk into an ICS facility and be like, this network is trash. You should just throw everything away and start over from scratch. Like, that's not happening at all.
Yeah, you have to strike a balance there. You have to decide and that's a really hard decision as an incident responder, because you have to decide your own confidence level in your investigation to make a recommendation. But how sure are you about what the adversary did, and what could be the consequences if you're wrong? And also, how soon do they absolutely have to be up and running to keep people safe and alive, and not destroy the facility, not have something catch on fire, or have the environment horribly contaminated? So a lot of factors, and you're not usually the ultimate decision maker in that, but you are a stakeholder, and you are an advisor to the people who are making that decision, a very well respected and regarded advisor to the people making that decision. So you have to be ready for that type of situation.
Oh God, you're bringing back memories at university where it was similar. It was the exact same thing, actually, just in a university environment. I'm like, that system's compromised. I'm like, we have so many compromised machines that crop up every week. I'm like, you need to format that machine and start over. And they're like, sometimes they'd be like, no, I'm not doing that. And then, higher ups in the university get involved, and they're like, no, Paul, they're not doing that. I'm like, okay, but if I see it compromised again, we're going to have a different discussion. Sometimes that wouldn't even fit. Oftentimes that was the case. If I saw it again, they'd be like, all right, you were right, Paul, format and reinstall, right? But you have to have that confidence as an investigator to be able to say, like, no, it's definitely compromised, and it's definitely bad enough to warrant, like, nuke it and start over, if that's the case.
Nuke it from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
Right.
And what we used to do was, if there was a machine that a higher up had said, well, we're not going to format that, it's fine, we ran the virus scan, because I'm old. That was this. It was no problem. You can keep the machine running as any way you want it, but it has no privileges on the network. In other words, it's not allowed to connect to the network.
Sometime I'll tell you about firmware attacks and how wiping the machine might not even solve the problem either. Of course, that would be a concern. Again, I go to ICS and I think nation state attackers, and I see trends where they're looking at firmware more and more currently. And in that, I mean, that has to be in the back of your mind too, Lesley, when you're doing recovery, is some of the more advanced attacks out there.
Yes, it is. It's something that we consider, but honestly, let me tell you the truth here. We're talking about legacy environments with squishy insides, with hopefully kind of crispy outside, and no EDR, no agents, and sometimes bad architecture in terms of segmentation and things. So things exposed to the internet and visible on Shodan.
So attackers
like
don't have to go to that level to accomplish the same goal.
Yeah. It is bad news to people who are listening who don't know this. All of us on this call know this, but if adversaries can use the exposed XP machine that's facing the internet to get into your network, they're gonna probably do that and not waste the time trying to build a 0-day exploit and exfiltrate things over hard drive noises. So just saying.
Right.
Or just use Telnet and then log in.
SATA. The latest one is SATA cables.
Make those cables vibrate. There was an antenna, right?
It was acting as an antenna.
Yeah,
the SATA cables.
That had to be those guys.
We'll talk about it in the next segment.
we'll talk about that one. But you're going to get tons of pushback too, even when you're trying to be an incident responder, because the pressure that you're going to get is to get everything back up and running. Just reboot it, get it going, start. We got to restart. Because I mean, when I worked at the bank, it was over $8,000 a minute for downtime. And if you went down and said, I want to IPL the mainframe, which took like 6 hours, they would have laughed in your face. I mean, it would have been like, it's just not worth it. We might as well just burn the place to the ground. You know,
I really love it when you use IPL as a verb. It's so hot.
Hey. It's a verb.
It is. It is a verb. I'm not.
Yeah.
We just don't.
Yes, but
I don't hear it.
Paul, do you know what that stands for?
Initial program load.
Very good.
No,
Well done,
or
sir.
intentional power loss is there's multiple acronyms
It's an
there.
overloaded acronym.
Oh yeah, it's overloaded. But it can be an intentional power loss. It can be an initial program load. You can IPL the IPL.
So now you're using it as a noun and a verb.
I've got a question.
Sorry, we got derailed. Adrian, do you have a question for Lesley?
I do have a question. Yeah, so for Lesley, you know, back like I did a lot of incident response, but it was all financial services. Like it was about as far away from ICS as you can get. You know, it was all Windows, Linux databases, web servers, stuff like that. And in the early days of breaches, a lot of companies would find out that they were breached through fraud detection, right? Like oftentimes it'd be third parties and stuff like that. And then we got into the sphere of ransomware and stuff like that. And the way you'd find out is, well, the ransom note. Okay, it's time for us to get paid. You know, the attacker would do you the courtesy of letting you know that you had a problem. In ICS, with ransomware, I assume you run into, the same kinds of extortion situations in ICS that you do everywhere else. But aside from that, how do people find out that they've had an intrusion, other than like traditional security tools and stuff like that?
Yeah, and there aren't necessarily a lot of traditional security tools. We're trying to get them out there, but it's slow going in some places. So definitely there's things like ransomware that are quite visible, or cause an antivirus fire. There's still sometimes traditional antivirus in those networks. And then there's process impact, where they can't determine the root cause of it. So that's kind of a little bit more of a hunting exercise to see if it's potentially cyber. So something has done something weird, and the vendor can't figure it out, and the engineers can't figure it out, and they've ruled out some other things. And now the question is it cyber? There's that for sure. And then we're starting, my company builds a security product for industrial, and we have some competitors who do similar things. So there are starting to be some more security products and security funding and security teams and security awareness out in industrial networks. So people are starting to notice more things, I think, potentially than they used to. So it's not just that there's more attacks necessarily, although there might be. There is more security maturity out there in the industrial spaces. So people are starting to catch on to more things than they used to, and then say, oh, that's weird. And You remember, like, maybe 10 years ago, they used to say, like, the time to detect an advanced adversary in your network was like 20 months or something ridiculous like that. It can still be like that in industrial because those networks are at the maturity we were back then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then kind of my follow-up question is, what about resiliency? Like how, I hear stories about how fragile things are, from my time pen testing. I have knocked things over unintentionally, and I've come across things that were just ridiculously easy to knock over. When doing response on this stuff, like how much do you have to tiptoe? Like I assume it kind of, you have a different bag of tricks, for acquiring memory, for example, from certain systems. But I imagine that the concern about taking stuff down slows you down somewhat in the response efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I can't necessarily just go out there and stick an agent on everything and pull everything back. That's usually out of reach in a lot of these environments, structurally, architecturally, as well as just concerns about the legacy stuff in the environment and the low level devices, stuff like that. So things can be a lot more manual. In terms of forensic tooling, there are a lot of fairly modern Windows hosts out there and Linux hosts out there that can be imaged with, manual but fairly modern forensics tools. But when you get to the low-level devices, if you've got to start doing forensics on PLCs and things, that can be as complicated as having to build cables to connect to them and figure out what's actually retained on them in terms of diagnostic and log data, because it may or may not be documented. So that can become somewhat of an adventure, reverse engineering the device to try to get forensic data off of it. So it's a mix. I wouldn't, if people are getting discouraged, if they're like, hey, I want to do differ in ICS, but I'll never be able to learn how to do forensics on all these low-level devices because they're so sensitive, yada, yada, yada. Keep in mind that in the Purdue model, the higher levels, there's a lot of familiar computers there. And because adversaries have to follow the rules of reality, they have to go through something to get into the network, right? So it's usually a traditional infrastructure device. It usually involves some kind of more traditional computer. So there's other places to catch the adversary. To get a very comprehensive picture of their adversary and vet the low-level devices, though, you might have to delve into some lower-level device forensics, which is its own field.
Yeah, that just sounds exciting to me. Not discouraging. Yeah. That's building cables so you can do forensics on something. I mean, maybe in a high pressure situation, if you're up against some kind of clock, I don't know.
Yeah, that $8,000 a minute clock, where and have the bank president stand behind you and go, "Is it fixed yet?" About every 2 seconds, and then we'll put you through the test, Adrian. I want to watch Adrian's cable building under pressure. We'll get some air horns and things just to make
That's when I do my best work. That's why I loved incident response.
I know a good one. We'll put one of those. Outside my office used to be a radiation sign that told you how many millirems you were absorbing while you were standing there. So we'll let you work right there, and you can your stopwatch.
That's capstone for my network engineering degree. The teacher stood behind us and played the bank CEO who was screaming at us to get things up in our long exam. And he had done his network destruction. He had done was stick a cron job on the router that rebooted it every 20 seconds.
Aww.
And every time you try to log in.
Ooh, I get so many ideas. My class is going to be so much harder this fall.
Oh my God.
I like that. A cron job that reboots the router every 20 seconds. That's a great script.
Pretty brutal.
Oh my God.
I'm just going to need some recordings of CEOs yelling. Oh, I got those. Yeah.
Yeah, where did he get those?
Let's get my voicemail out.
Sufficient percussive maintenance will fix that.
Burn in hell, Vinkman.
Lesley, on the defensive side, what are some of your most common recommendations that you think are the most impactful for ICS environments?
Yeah, so architecture first. Try to start thinking about segmentation and what you can do in terms of hardening the outside, at least, of your industrial network. Then think about monitoring. Try to get some monitoring and detection out there. Try to get something, even if it's entirely passive, out there collecting logs and then detecting network traffic If it's not our product, find somebody else's who you like. Just get something out there to monitor your industrial network so you've got some detection and also some forensic data. Vulnerability management, start trying to build a vulnerability management program for your industrial network. Start trying to think about what might be more exploitable and what you need to build more defenses around. It's something that gets overlooked a ton. And then remote access, try to keep the outer shell crispy. And then, even if the inside's fairly squishy, start doing multi-factor on your remote access. Start really logging what happens with remote access. Make sure there's only one way in, stuff like that. So there's a lot of things people can do right now.
Does Rob's beard have its own email address or account? I feel like it should.
I feel like it should too. I might have to get on that.
What's it like working for Rob? He was on the show not that long ago.
Oh, Rob's
You might
great.
have to build his beard a Twitter account, Lesley. I think you could do that very, very.
Yes.
I could. I don't think I would be risking my employment by doing that, but I like to claim. I'm like to claim though that I'm the reason. I'm going to say this on recording now that I'm the reason that Rob got into gin. So I'm proud of that. I feel like that's my one special contribution to Dragos and the industrial cybersecurity effort is getting Rob into gin.
Oh, what's your favorite gins? What are some of your favorite gins?
Oh man, I mean, if I'm just going to get something that they have typically at a bar, I'm a Hendrix person. But I like Monkey 47. I just went to Australia and I got to try. The gin is huge there. They actually like it there. People like it. So I went to a bunch of distilleries and I tried some really, really, really good stuff there. So there was a nice Bloody Shiraz gin there. It was amazing. But
Josh,
do you like the Genevers?
Do you like Tanqueray? I think that's what Josh was gonna. Is Tanqueray?
No.
Is that even considered I know it's a gin, but it's like the really low. I had
depends
this
on what you're
argument with my
drinking,
brother-in-law.
what you're going to mix it with. Yeah.
Yeah, I had this argument with my brother all the time. I'm like,
Not for
it's
sipping.
it's like the Bud Light of gins.
Oh,
man.
it's not. It's what
Yeah,
you
it really
you
is.
make gin and tonics with Tanqueray.
Yeah, but then it tastes
That's
like
the
you're drinking a tree, man.
Well, it's supposed to be a botanical.
Yeah, but botanical.
Okay, shout out
Monkey
to
47.
Field Museum Gin in Chicago. If you can get it imported or brought in from your local shop, it's made of Paleolithic herbs. So it's supposed to be like dinosaur era gin. It's really interesting. So
they did that with
one.
beer. Someone did Midas Touch, and it was like a beer recipe that they had reverse engineered from like long ago. I forget which era it was. Right? Yeah, I think that's really cool.
I'll give 2 votes for Monkey 45. I like that
Monkey
one.
45 or Monkey 47?
Or whatever it is, whatever the number is. It 47?
Yeah.
It's 47.
Yeah,
I
It's
think.
really
stuff.
good stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Really good stuff.
I like it a
Monkey
lot.
47.
Yeah.
I just ordered, James May. I don't know if anybody here watches Top Gear, but James May has his own gin now, Asian parsnip gin. And I just ordered some the other day. Looks really good.
Sounds good.
I feel like we need our own gin now or something. Like
The Security
everyone's
Weekly
doing it.
brand.
Everyone has their own vodka, their own tequila, their own
You
gin.
need a line of liquors. I mean, you have a show that involves drinking. You should have a line of Security Weekly alcohol.
I agree.
But it would have to be good because it could easily go the other way, and it ends up like Pruno or something like Security Weekly brand Pruno.
Well, for the gin, though, it'd have
That
to
would
pass
be on
Lesley.
brand.
It'd have to pass Leslie's test if it was the gin.
Yeah,
We sent Lesley the first bottle. And
we just can't brew
Oh,
it.
I'm in. I'll be your gin taster.
Ooh,
There you go.
Cook it in an old server case in there, and
awesome. Lesley, anything else you want to share with our audience this evening? You got any talks coming up, or?
I really wanted to
I'll be
ask about your
running
career advice stuff.
Wait,
actually,
hold on. Tyler has another question before we get to that.
we didn't even
We
touch
have
on
heard
your career advice stuff. That was one of the important things I think you probably should speak about.
We have a segue. Yes, I'll be at Blue Team Con in Chicago in about a month, running a career village there for a couple of days. So if you're in the area, definitely come out to Blue Team Con and come have us check out your interview skills and your resume and try to get you a job that you like that pays good money. So I do those around the place. If you run a conference and you want myself or my colleagues to come out and run a resume workshop, we're pretty good at doing those now. Get in touch with us, give us some advance warning, and we'll see if we can do that for you.
Outstanding. Well, Lesley, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.